In Willow Creek, weddings were supposed to smell of lilacs and laughter, but this one reeked of shame and gunpowder. The church bells tolled across the dusty Montana town, each chime ringing like a sentence being passed. Folks gathered in their Sunday best, though not one of them wore a real smile. They came not to celebrate, but to witness the strangest union Willow Creek had ever seen, a sheriff marrying the shyest woman in town, not out of love, but because the law demanded it. Sheriff Cole Archer stood at the altar like a man being marched to the gallows. The black coat he wore felt more like a shroud than a wedding garment. His jaw was set hard, his eyes colder than the Colt revolver that once made his name feared across the frontier. Across the aisle, Emma Dalton trembled beneath a lace veil her mother had sewn years ago, before illness took her away. The fabric was delicate, like the woman herself. Emma had never spoken more than a handful of words to anyone outside her small circle. She was known as the quiet girl from the boarding house, the one who looked down when men passed and never stayed long at gatherings. But 2 nights ago, a rumor had torn through town faster than wildfire. Emma Dalton had been found in the sheriff's cabin after sundown. No one cared that she'd been seeking shelter from the storm or that Cole had kept his distance out of decency. Appearances ruled in Willow Creek, and appearances damned them both. So here they stood, two unwilling souls bound by whispers and obligation. The preacher's voice droned through the vows, his hands trembling as he flipped the worn Bible open. "Do you, Cole Archer, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" The silence that followed stretched long enough to make the crowd shift uncomfortably. Cole's gaze dropped to the floorboards, then to the fragile figure before him. His voice came out rough, the words dragged through gravel. "I do." When it was Emma's turn, her lips barely moved, yet the whisper was clear as the wind. "I do." The preacher's smile faltered. He could feel the air thick with judgment, could see the townsfolk leaning forward, hungry for something to talk about. Outside, the sun burned against the whitewashed windows, and a gust of wind rattled the church door, as though heaven itself disapproved. Cole placed the ring on her finger, his rough hand brushing against her skin. She flinched, not from him, but from the weight of what that touch meant. "By the power vested in me," the preacher said, his voice uncertain, "I now pronounce you man and wife." No one clapped. No one cheered. The only sound was the creak of the floorboards as they turned to face the crowd. Every eye in Willow Creek seemed to judge them. Old Mrs. Potts whispered to her husband, "Shameful business, this." A boy in the front pew smirked, nudging his friend. Cole clenched his jaw. He'd faced men with guns pointed at his chest and never felt this kind of unease. The murmur of gossip hit harder than any bullet. He took Emma's hand, small, cold, uncertain, and led her down the aisle. Outside, the wind whipped through the street, scattering dust and whispers alike. The horse-drawn wagon waited to carry them to the small cabin at the edge of town. Cole helped Emma climb aboard, careful not to touch her more than necessary. She kept her gaze fixed on her hands, the ring glinting like a shackle in the sunlight. Neither spoke as the wheels creaked forward, carrying them past the saloon, the mercantile, and the faces pressed against windows. The silence between them grew heavy. Cole's mind wandered to the life he'd once imagined. Freedom, solitude, no attachments. Now all that seemed as distant as the mountain range that framed the horizon. He glanced at Emma, saw how she sat upright, her shoulders stiff with unease. "You didn't deserve this," he finally said, his voice low. She turned her head slightly, her eyes hidden beneath the veil. "Neither did you." It was the first full sentence she'd spoken to him since the day began. Her tone wasn't bitter, just factual, resigned. Cole found himself respecting her for it. When they reached the cabin, the place looked smaller than he remembered. 2 rooms, a porch that leaned a little too far forward, a lantern still hanging from last night's storm. He helped her down, and for a brief second their eyes met. There was no hate there, no blame, only confusion and the faintest spark of defiance, like a candle refusing to go out. Inside, the air smelled of pine and gun oil. Emma removed her gloves, folded them carefully on the table, and looked around the space that would now be her home. Cole stood awkwardly near the door, unsure what to say. Words weren't his strength. Action was. But there was no gunfight to win here, only silence to survive. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," he said finally. Emma nodded without looking at him. "You don't have to explain, Sheriff." That title, spoken so softly, still carried authority. It reminded him who he was supposed to be, the man who enforced order, who kept his distance. But something in her voice made him feel like he'd already failed at both. He stepped outside, the cool evening breeze carrying the smell of sage and dust. He could still hear faint laughter from town, fading into the wind. For a moment, he wished the earth would just swallow the whole day. Instead, he leaned against the porch post, eyes fixed on the setting sun, its orange light slicing across the prairie. Inside the cabin, Emma stood before the small mirror, lifting the veil from her face. Her reflection showed a woman neither weak nor shy, but someone caught between duty and survival. Her eyes shimmered, not from tears, but from something deeper. She pressed a hand against her chest, trying to quiet the storm there. The sky darkened. Crickets began their nightly chorus. Cole didn't move from his spot, keeping watch without reason. When the last light faded, he finally turned back toward the door, meaning only to blow out the lantern before bedding down in the barn. But as he stepped inside, Emma looked up from across the room, her eyes locking with his. And in that single glance, through the dim glow of oil light, he saw something he hadn't expected. Not meekness, not fear. It was defiance. A quiet challenge buried beneath her shyness. For the first time, Cole Archer realized that the woman he'd been forced to marry might be far stronger than the town, or even he, had ever believed. When Cole lifts her veil, he sees something in her eyes he didn't expect. Fear mixed with defiance. The cabin stood quiet beneath the cold Montana sky. But inside its wooden walls lived a war of unspoken words and hearts afraid to breathe. The first days of their marriage unfolded like the slow ticking of a clock, steady, relentless, and painfully quiet. Cole and Emma shared the same roof, the same air, and yet they lived as strangers, bound by a single, unbreakable thread of obligation. Each morning began with the same sound. The creak of the porch boards as Cole left before sunrise, the kettle whistling on the stove as Emma moved about the kitchen, careful not to make noise enough to be noticed. It was a rhythm of survival, not affection. Cole spent most of his days at the sheriff's office or out patrolling the borders of Willow Creek. He told himself he did it to keep the peace. But in truth, he was running. From the uncomfortable silence that filled their small cabin and from the reflection of his own choices staring back at him in Emma's downcast eyes. The townsfolk treated him no differently, but he could feel their curiosity linger. He'd been their lawman, their savior during the border raids. But now every handshake came with a whisper that followed behind his back. "Poor girl," they said about Emma. "Must be a strange kind of life, married to a man like him." Others, crueler still, said, "Maybe she's better off in silence. Women like her don't need much talking." Emma pretended not to hear, but gossip clung to her like burrs on a hem. When she went into town for supplies, heads turned. She kept her voice soft, her steps smaller than necessary, her hands folded neatly in front of her as though good manners could shield her from judgment. Only Mrs. Harlan, the shopkeeper's wife, dared speak kindly to her. "You're doing fine, dear," she said once, handing over a sack of flour. The quiet ones often carry the heaviest hearts. Emma had simply nodded, her lips pressed into a polite smile, and left before tears could betray her composure. Back at the cabin, she filled her days with work, mending, cooking, sweeping the porch that never seemed to stay clean. Cole noticed how she never complained, how she moved like someone afraid to disturb the air itself. Guilt gnawed at him. He hadn't chosen this marriage, but neither had she. And though he'd sworn to protect her honor, he realized he'd offered her little more than solitude and a name. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the hills in gold, Cole returned home later than usual. The cabin was lit only by the soft glow of a single lantern. Emma sat near the window, sewing a tear in his shirt, her posture straight but her eyes distant. For a moment he just watched her, how the lamplight caught her hair, how her hands moved with quiet purpose. He cleared his throat softly and she looked up. "You didn't have to do that," he said, nodding toward the shirt. Her voice was gentle, barely above a whisper. It needed fixing. He hesitated before sitting across from her. "You could have left it. I've gone through worse holes than that." A small flicker of a smile appeared on her lips, quick, fragile. "I can tell." It was the first time they'd shared something close to humor, and for the briefest second the air between them lightened, but just as quickly it passed. She lowered her gaze again, the rhythm of her sewing steady and quiet. Cole leaned back, unsure of what to say next. He'd never been good with gentle words. In his world, silence had always been safer than sincerity. As days turned into weeks, their lives began to intertwine in small, unspoken ways. Emma would leave fresh coffee waiting for him each morning. Cole would chop extra firewood without being asked. They spoke little, yet a kind of fragile understanding began to grow, one built not on affection but on respect. And still the silence lingered like fog, thick and unmoving. At night, Cole often sat outside under the stars, the smell of pine and gun oil heavy in the air. He would light a cigarette, stare at the mountains, and wonder if peace was something a man like him could ever deserve. Behind him, Emma's shadow would sometimes flicker against the window curtain. He never looked too long, afraid that if he did, he might find something in her gaze he wasn't ready to face. One night, the first snow of winter began to fall. The air turned sharp, and the wind howled through the cracks of the cabin. Cole sat by the fire, his hat resting on his knee, lost in thought. Emma moved quietly behind him, placing another log on the flames. The warmth lit her face in soft amber tones, and for a fleeting moment she seemed almost at ease. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the stillness. He looked up, surprised. "Miss what?" "The life you had before me." He studied her carefully, unsure how to answer. Finally he said, "Oh, it wasn't much of a life, Emma, just dust and blood. Nothing worth missing." She nodded once, then turned away. "Sometimes I think even dust remembers more kindness than people do." Her words lingered in the air long after she went to her room. Cole sat there, staring into the fire until it burned low, wondering how someone so quiet could speak words that cut so deep. Later that night, sleep came heavy and unkind. Cole tossed and turned, caught in a dream that smelled of gun smoke and rain. He heard her name again, the woman from his past, the one who'd once loved him and died because of the choices he made. "Annie," he murmured, the sound rough and aching. Emma stirred in the darkness. At first she thought she'd misheard, but then his voice came again, softer now, filled with pain. "Annie, I'm sorry." Her breath caught in her throat. She turned her face toward the dim glow of the dying fire, her heart twisting at the sound. Whoever Annie was, she wasn't just a name, she was a ghost that still shared their home. Emma lay awake long after the whisper faded. Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the land in silence. Inside, a different kind of cold settled in, one that no fire could melt. She stared at the wooden ceiling, her pulse steady but her thoughts racing. For the first time since the day of their wedding, Emma wasn't afraid of Cole Archer. She was afraid of what or who still lived inside his heart. That night, as the snow whispered against the windows, Emma heard Cole murmur another woman's name in his sleep. Every man has ghosts, but Cole Archer's ghost wore a woman's face, and she still whispered his name in the dark. The morning after the snowstorm, the air in Willow Creek carried a stillness that felt heavier than silence itself. Emma moved quietly through the cabin, stirring the fire back to life, pretending she hadn't heard that name. "Annie." It echoed in her mind, soft yet sharp enough to cut. She didn't ask him about it when he rose, though the shadows under his eyes said enough. He looked older that morning, as if the night had stolen years from him. Cole drank his coffee in silence, staring out the window at the frozen land. Emma's gaze lingered on him, on the tired slump of his shoulders, on the way his hand trembled slightly as he set the mug down. There was something about him she hadn't seen before. Not hardness, but regret. She wanted to ask who Annie was, but her nature stopped her. Some things, she understood, a person must reveal on their own, or not at all. After breakfast, Cole saddled his horse and rode toward town. The trail was lined with frost-bitten sagebrush and skeletal trees bending under snow. The cold bit through his coat, but it was nothing compared to the chill of memory creeping into his thoughts. No matter how far he rode, Annie's face followed him, freckled, sunlit, smiling the way she had before the world went wrong. Years ago, before the badge, before Willow Creek, he'd been part of something darker. The Red Hand Gang, they'd called themselves. Men who rode for gold, not honor. Cole had joined out of desperation, not greed. Back then, he believed a man could outrun the law as long as his horse was fast enough and his conscience quiet. But conscience had a way of catching up. It was Annie who'd changed everything. She'd been a school teacher in Abilene, small and stubborn, with a kindness that disarmed even the hardest men. When she found out who Cole really was, she didn't run. She told him to stop running instead. "You can't build a life on stolen ground," she'd said. He tried to believe her, tried to leave that world behind. But the past never lets go easily. One night, a raid went wrong. His gang turned on him when he refused to pull the trigger on a marshal's family. Gunfire filled the dark, and by dawn, Annie was gone, caught in the crossfire meant for him. Her blood had stained his hands, and her last words had burned into his mind like brands. "You promised me peace." That was the day Cole Archer buried his name, his heart, and his soul beneath the law. He pinned on the badge to make amends, to silence the guilt that haunted him. But guilt doesn't die, it waits, patient as a snake in tall grass. Back in the present, Cole reined his horse outside the saloon. The usual crowd was there, miners nursing whiskey before noon, ranch hands trading stories too tall to be true. Yet when he stepped inside, the noise dimmed. He felt their stares, the same old unease that followed him everywhere. "Sheriff," the bartender said, setting down a glass. "Heard there's a new rider been asking about you." Cole's eyes narrowed. "What kind of rider?" The man shrugged. "Quiet sort. Wore a duster, carried himself like trouble. Said he used to ride with a man named Archer." Cole's pulse tightened. Only one kind of man would still call him that. The kind who knew his past. He tossed a coin on the counter, nodded once, and left. The cold outside hit him like truth. Whoever this stranger was, he wasn't far behind. When Cole returned home that evening, Emma was mending a torn curtain by the hearth. The sight of her, calm, patient, unaware of the storm heading their way, made something inside him ache. He hung his coat, removed his hat, and sat across from her. The fire cast long shadows across the room, painting his face in flickers of orange and regret. "You ever lose someone?" he asked suddenly. Emma's needle paused mid-stitch. "Yes," she said softly. "My mother." He nodded, staring into the flames. "Then you know how it feels when the world keeps moving, but you're still standing in the same place." Her voice trembled slightly. "Was it the woman you spoke of last night?" Cole's eyes lifted to hers, startled, then softened. "You heard that, huh?" She nodded, waiting. Not pressing, just waiting. It was enough to make him speak. "Her name was Annie. She believed in me before I ever believed in myself. I didn't deserve her." He paused, the words thick in his throat. "She died because of the kind of man I used to be." Emma's heart ached for him, though she said nothing. She simply reached over, pouring him another cup of coffee, her small gesture, saying more than words could. For a long while they sat together, two souls bound by pain neither had chosen. The fire cracked and spat, the sound like distant gunfire. Outside, the snow began to melt, drops of water trickling from the eaves like tears. But peace was a fragile thing in Willow Creek. And that night, as the sun bled behind the mountains, the distant echo of hooves cut through the quiet. Cole heard it first, steady, deliberate, the rhythm of a rider who knew exactly where he was going. He stepped onto the porch, hand resting on the revolver at his side. In the fading light, a lone figure approached, his silhouette dark against the snow. The man rode with the easy slouch of someone used to violence, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. Emma came to the door behind Cole, her voice low. "Someone you know?" Cole didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the rider as he slowed his horse, stopping a few yards away. The stranger tipped his hat just enough for the firelight to catch the scar running from his cheek to his jaw. "Well, I'll be damned," the man drawled. "Cole Archer. Didn't think you'd have the guts to show your face again." The name hung in the air like a shot fired into silence. Emma's breath caught. Cole's hand tensed around his gun, but he didn't draw. Not yet. The past he'd buried had just ridden back into his life, and this time, it wasn't coming quietly. A stranger rides into town, one who knows Cole's past too well. The saloon doors creaked open, and with them walked the ghost of every sin Cole Archer had tried to bury. The stranger's boots echoed across the wooden floor of the Willow Creek saloon, slow and deliberate, like a clock ticking down to judgment. The place fell silent, not out of respect but out of fear. His long duster was streaked with road dust, and the revolver at his hip gleamed beneath the lantern light, worn but deadly. Men turned away, pretending to sip their drinks, but everyone watched him from the corners of their eyes. Cole Archer didn't move. He sat at the far end of the bar, one hand curled loosely around a glass of whiskey, the other resting near his holster. He had known this day would come, just not this soon. "Didn't think I'd find you playing lawman," the stranger drawled, his voice rough as gravel. "Cole Archer, the ghost turned sheriff." Cole turned slowly, meeting the man's stare. "Name's Sheriff Archer now, and I don't recall inviting you to town." The man grinned, revealing a chipped tooth. "No, I suppose you didn't. But fate's got poor manners, don't it?" He stepped closer, the air between them heavy with old memories. Cole saw it now, the scar across his jaw, the faint limp in his left leg. Jesse Crane, a name from a darker time. They'd once ridden together in the Red Hand Gang, back when law was just a word men spat out before pulling the trigger. Crane had been the worst of them, cruel, reckless, loyal to nothing but gold. "What do you want?" Cole asked, his voice low. "Same thing you want, I reckon, to stay alive. But you've got a problem coming your way." The saloon had grown so quiet that even the creak of a chair sounded loud. Jesse leaned in, his breath thick with whiskey. "You remember Boone Carter?" Cole stiffened. Boone Carter, the gang's old leader, a man who'd burned towns for sport and killed anyone who crossed him. Cole thought he died years ago in a border ambush. "He's alive," Jesse said, watching for a reaction. "And he ain't forgotten who left him for dead in the desert. He's coming for you, Cole, and anyone who stands near you." Cole's fingers tightened around his glass. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, but his heart hammered a warning against his ribs. Boone Carter had been more than an outlaw. He'd been the devil himself on horseback. If he was alive, then no law, no badge, no frontier distance would keep him away for long. "Why tell me?" Cole asked finally. "You were never one for charity." Jesse chuckled. "Let's just say Boone's got a long list, and my name's on it too. He's rebuilding what's left of the Red Hand, new blood, same poison. You and me, we're the ones who broke it last time. He wants payback." Cole leaned back slowly, studying him. "You riding with me then?" "Not exactly." Jesse took a long sip of whiskey and set the glass down. "I came to warn you, not die beside you. Boone's got men scattered from here to the Dakota line. You best pack up that pretty wife of yours and vanish before he rides through." The word wife landed heavier than the rest. Cole's expression didn't change, but Jesse saw the flicker in his eyes. "So it's true," Jesse said with a smirk. "The great Cole Archer chained down by a quiet little missus. Guess even killers need comfort now and then." Before Cole could respond, the saloon door opened again. Emma stood there, her face pale beneath her bonnet. She'd come to bring him his coat. It was colder than she'd realized. And now she froze at the sight of the two men facing each other. She didn't know who Jesse Crane was, but she didn't need an introduction to understand the danger. The tension in the room was sharp enough to draw blood. Cole stood quickly. "Emma, go home." Her voice trembled. "Cole, who is he?" "Go," he said again, firmer this time. She hesitated only a moment before turning to leave. The door swung shut behind her, but she lingered just beyond it, her heart pounding. Through the thin wall, she could still hear their voices. "You telling her the truth, Cole?" Jesse taunted. "She got any notion who she married? Or does she still think you're some noble lawman wearing that tin star out of guilt?" Cole's jaw clenched. "You best watch your tongue." "Why? You gonna shoot me right here? Go ahead. Add another ghost to that long list of yours." The chair scraped as Cole rose. "I ain't that man anymore." Jesse's grin widened. "That's where you're wrong. You can hang up your gun, hide behind that badge, even marry a quiet woman who don't ask questions, but Boone's riding this way, and when he gets here, he'll remind you exactly who you are." He tossed something onto the bar, a small brass bullet casing that rolled across the wood before coming to rest beside Cole's drink. Etched into its side was a symbol Cole hadn't seen in years. A red hand carved in fine detail. Cole stared at it for a long moment, the sound of its roll still echoing in his ears. "Consider that my farewell," Jesse said, tipping his hat. "He's closer than you think." Then he turned and walked out, the saloon doors swinging behind him like the closing of a coffin lid. Outside, Emma stepped quickly into the alley, her heart racing. She'd heard enough to know her husband's past wasn't buried at all. And that danger was no longer a distant rumor, but a shadow already moving toward them. She pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to steady her breath. When Cole finally came out, his face was hard as stone. He didn't look at her right away, just scanned the street as if expecting to see Boone Carter himself appear from the darkness. The town's lamps flickered, their weak glow barely keeping the night at bay. "Cole," Emma whispered. "Who was that man?" He didn't answer. Instead, he closed his hand around the bullet casing, the engraved red hand biting cold into his palm. "Someone I hoped I'd never see again," he said at last. They walked home in silence, their shadows stretching long behind them. The wind carried the sound of distant hooves, faint but growing. Emma's mind replayed every word she'd overheard, every threat hidden in Jesse Crane's warning. When they reached the cabin, she turned to her husband, searching his face for honesty. "Are we safe here?" she asked. Cole met her gaze, his eyes dark with things he couldn't bring himself to confess. "We will be," he said quietly. But his voice didn't carry conviction. It carried fear. That night, long after Emma had gone to bed, Cole sat alone by the fire, turning the bullet casing in his fingers. The flame's reflection gleamed against the engraved red hand, twisting like blood in light. He knew what it meant. Boone Carter was alive, and worse, he was coming. When Jesse Crane rode out of town, he left behind a single bullet casing engraved with a red hand, the mark of Cole Archer's old gang. When Emma's hand brushed his, it wasn't passion. It was mercy, and it made Cole Archer realize how long it had been since anyone had touched him without fear. The morning sun broke over Willow Creek, turning the frost-covered fields into sheets of gold. After the stranger's warning, Cole hadn't slept much. His mind spun with old memories and new threats, every creak outside the cabin making his hand twitch toward the revolver on the table. By dawn, he'd decided the best way to quiet his thoughts was with work. Hard, honest work. So he spent the morning fixing the old barn roof that winter winds had nearly torn apart. The air was cold, the boards slick with frost. He swung the hammer with steady precision, trying to bury the past beneath the sound of each strike. The ache in his shoulders was familiar, comforting even, until his boot slipped on the edge of the roof. The nail he'd been driving missed its mark and bit into his palm instead. He grunted, more in frustration than pain, but the blood that followed was deep and dark. Inside the cabin, Emma heard the crash and ran out, her shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. She found him sitting against the barn wall, his hand pressed to his side, blood seeping through his fingers. "Cole," she gasped, kneeling beside him. "Let me see." "It's fine," he muttered, trying to stand. "Just a scratch." But she'd already seen the cut, and it was far from a scratch. Without another word, she took his arm and guided him inside. He wanted to protest, but something in her voice, steady, calm, sure, made him obey. The cabin felt warmer than usual, the fire still burning from breakfast. Emma fetched a basin of water and clean cloth. Her movements quick but careful. Cole sat at the table, his jaw clenched as she began to clean the wound. He didn't flinch at the sting, but his eyes followed every motion of her hands. They were small, steady and gentle, hands that had known more work than rest. "You should have asked for help," she murmured, wrapping a strip of linen around his palm. "I don't ask for help," he replied quietly. "Never have. That's a poor habit for a man who bleeds like the rest of us." For the first time in days, he almost smiled. There was no fear in her tone, only honesty. He respected that. Her fingers brushed his wrist as she tied the bandage, and for a fleeting second the air shifted. Soft, almost fragile. Neither spoke, but both felt something change between them, something that didn't belong to duty or silence. When she finished, she started to pull her hand back, but he caught it gently. "Thank you," he said. His voice carried a weight it rarely did. Something sincere, unguarded. She met his eyes, surprised by the softness there. "You're welcome," she whispered, then turned away to pour fresh water into the basin as though afraid the moment had lasted too long. The rest of the day passed quietly, though the silence between them no longer felt hollow. Emma moved around the kitchen while Cole stayed near the fire, mending one of his shirts with his uninjured hand. Every now and then their eyes met, brief and uncertain, like two people learning a language neither had spoken before. That evening she set a meal on the table. Stew with fresh bread and the last jar of preserved peaches she'd been saving. Cole raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize today was special," he said. Emma gave a faint smile. "It's not, but I thought we could use something warm that isn't just coffee." They ate in quiet peace. For once the silence wasn't heavy, it was easy, almost companionable. Outside the wind rattled the shutters, but inside the fire's glow painted everything in shades of gold and comfort. Halfway through the meal, Emma looked up. "That man from the saloon," she said softly. "Jesse Crane. He's the one who warned you, isn't he?" Cole's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "You shouldn't have been there, Emma." "I know," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I heard enough to know you're in danger." He sighed, setting his fork down. "It's my danger, not yours." "You're my husband," she said firmly. "That makes it mine, too." The words hung between them, simple yet powerful. He didn't know what to say. No one had ever claimed him before, not like that. After supper, they sat by the fire again. Cole told her a little of his past, not everything, but enough. About the Red Hand Gang, about the choices that led him here, about the man named Boone Carter who might soon darken their door. Emma didn't interrupt or recoil. She just listened, her expression calm, her eyes kind. "I ain't proud of it," Cole said, staring into the flames. "But I've spent every day since trying to make it right." "You can't change the past," Emma said gently, "but you can choose what kind of man you'll be tomorrow." Her words struck something deep within him. For years, Cole had carried his guilt like armor, but hearing it from her, quiet, steady Emma, made it feel a little less heavy. Outside, the wind shifted. The night deepened into stillness, the kind that hides things better left unseen. When Emma went to bed, Cole stayed by the fire, lost in thought. The warmth she'd shown him unsettled him more than any threat could. Mercy was dangerous. It made a man remember what it meant to feel. He stood after a while, checking the door and windows as he always did. But when he reached for the latch, his fingers froze. Something glinted in the lantern light. A small piece of paper nailed to the door. Cole tore it free, his pulse quickening. The note was written in rough, crooked letters that stank of menace. I know who you are. No signature. Just those 5 words and a faint smear of red dust across the corner. Dust from the desert, the kind that never washed away. Cole's hand tightened around the paper. Boone Carter was closer than Jesse had warned. The shadows of his past had finally found his doorstep. He turned toward the bedroom where Emma slept, her soft breathing steady against the quiet. For a moment he considered waking her, telling her everything, but then he stopped. She'd already risked enough by standing beside him. Instead, he folded the note and slipped it into his coat pocket, his jaw set hard. If the past was coming for him, he'd face it alone. But outside, under the cloak of night, a figure on horseback waited beyond the tree line, watching, patient and silent. Just as warmth begins to grow, Cole finds a note nailed to their door. I know who you are. No one in Willow Creek would have believed that the shyest woman in town once drew a knife on a rich man's son and smiled when he ran. For days after the note appeared, Cole grew more guarded. He'd started checking the barn at dawn, patrolling the edges of their property long after sunset. Emma noticed the change, the way his eyes never rested, the way he stood straighter when the wind carried hoofbeats in the distance. But she said nothing. She had learned that sometimes silence was the only way to stand beside a man like Cole Archer. The cabin felt different now. The peace they'd begun to build was cracked by tension neither of them dared name. Yet underneath that fear, something else had begun to stir between them, a current of trust, quiet but strong. It wasn't born of romance, not yet, but of something older and harder to define, survival, shared and unspoken. That evening, the sky turned a strange shade of copper, thick clouds rolling over the mountains like bruises. The air smelled of rain and pine, the kind that promised a long, relentless storm. Cole had gone out to secure the horses when the first drops began to fall. Emma stood on the porch, watching him move through the rain, his figure half swallowed by mist. When he finally came inside, soaked and tired, she handed him a towel. You're going to catch your death out there, she said softly. He smiled faintly. I've survived worse weather. She didn't smile back. Instead, she walked to the stove, stirring the stew she'd been keeping warm. The firelight danced across her face, making her eyes seem deeper, older. Cole watched her in silence. For the first time, he realized he didn't know much about her at all. Not where she came from. Not what had made her so quiet, so careful. He only knew the world had not been kind. Emma, he said finally, why did you come to Willow Creek? Her hand paused on the wooden spoon. The question hung in the air like a challenge. You never asked before. I'm asking now. She set the spoon down slowly, then turned to face him. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried a shadow he hadn't seen before. Because there was nowhere else left to go. Cole leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Who were you running from? She gave a small, humorless laugh. Not running, escaping. Then for the first time, Emma told him her story. 2 years before she ever set foot in Willow Creek, she and her younger sister Clara had worked at their father's farm near Bozeman. It was a quiet, simple life until the son of a local land baron took an interest in Clara. He was rich, cruel, and used to taking what he wanted. One evening, when he cornered Clara near the barn, Emma intervened. There was shouting, a struggle, and before Emma even knew what she'd done, she was holding a knife slick with the man's blood. The wound hadn't been fatal, but the scandal had been. The land baron made sure the story spread. How the Dalton girls were wild, unladylike, dangerous. Within days, the family's reputation was ruined. Their father's business collapsed under the weight of gossip and debt. When he died that winter, the town blamed Emma for bringing shame on his name. She left before spring thawed the fields, carrying only what she could fit in a sack. She'd never seen her sister again. When she finished, the fire had burned low and the storm outside had swelled into a steady downpour. Cole sat in silence, the story sinking deep into him. He'd seen cruelty before, too much of it. But hearing how the world had turned against her made something twist inside his chest. "You did what you had to do," he said finally. Her lips curved into a faint, sad smile. The town didn't see it that way. They were fools. She looked up at him then, her eyes reflecting the firelight like glass. "You don't believe I'm a bad woman? I think you're the only kind of woman this world still needs," he said quietly. The words caught her off guard. No one had ever said anything like that to her. For so long she'd worn her silence like armor, afraid to let anyone see the fire underneath. But Cole's gaze wasn't judging. It was steady, sincere, and full of something that felt dangerously close to admiration. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains. Inside, the air between them grew warmer, heavier. Cole stood and crossed the room to check the window shutters. His hand brushed hers as he reached for the latch, and she didn't move away this time. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something she didn't quite understand. "You've carried a lot alone," he said softly. "So have you." He turned to her then, close enough to see the raindrops clinging to her lashes. The faint scar along her jaw she usually kept hidden in shadow. "You're stronger than you let people see." Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with truth. "I got tired of being seen." For a moment neither spoke. The rain drummed harder against the roof, wind howling through the trees outside. Cole reached up, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. She didn't flinch. Something in her broke free then. A dam of restraint she'd built over years of silence. The same fire that had made her defend her sister now rose again, fierce and uncontrollable. She stepped closer, her breath catching. "You think you know me, Cole Archer," she whispered. "But you've only seen the quiet." Before he could answer, she reached up and kissed him. It wasn't shy or hesitant, it was raw, desperate and full of all, the words she'd never spoken. The storm outside crashed against the cabin, wind and rain thrashing in wild rhythm, but neither noticed. His hand came up to her cheek, and for one suspended moment the past they'd both been running from didn't matter. When she finally pulled back, her breath came fast, her eyes searching his. "I'm not the timid woman the town thinks I am," she said softly. "And I don't want you to be the man who keeps pretending he's stone." Cole didn't move. He could still feel the warmth of her lips, the pulse of her courage. Every instinct in him screamed to step away, to build the walls back up, but he couldn't. Not after that. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the small cabin in a burst of white light before plunging it back into darkness. The rain fell harder, the sound like 1,000 whispers at once. Neither spoke again that night. She retreated to her room, and Cole stood by the fire long after, his hand pressed to his mouth, his mind spinning. The shy woman he'd married had just kissed him like a storm. And for the first time in years, Cole Archer was afraid of something that didn't carry a gun. That night, as rain pours, Emma kisses him, unexpected, fierce, and full of unspoken fire. One wild kiss shattered every wall between them, leaving two guarded souls standing bare before the firelight. And neither knew if it was salvation or ruin. The storm lasted through the night, hammering the roof and shaking the windows. But inside that cabin, the louder storm had already broken. Cole barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma, the way she'd looked at him before she kissed him, fearless and trembling all at once. He could still feel the warmth of her breath, the press of her hand against his chest, the unspoken challenge in her eyes. For years, he'd built his life around silence and distance, convincing himself that feelings were weaknesses a man couldn't afford. But Emma Dalton had undone that lie with one fierce kiss. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, and the first light seeped through the cracks in the shutters. Cole sat at the table, staring at the dying embers in the hearth, his mind wrestling with questions he couldn't answer. What right did he have to want her? His name was tarnished by the past, his life hunted by old enemies. Love for a man like him wasn't a gift. It was a liability. Yet for the first time in years, he wanted something beyond survival. He wanted peace, and she was the only thing that made it feel possible. When Emma emerged from her room, her hair still damp from washing, she hesitated for only a moment before crossing to the stove. She didn't blush or stammer. The shyness that had once defined her was gone. Something in her had shifted overnight, a quiet resolve in the way she moved, in the steadiness of her hands as she poured coffee. Cole watched her, waiting for her to speak, but she stayed silent. Finally, he said, "About last night." She turned, meeting his gaze with calm eyes. "You don't have to explain, Cole. I know it wasn't planned." "It wasn't," he admitted, "but I ain't sorry either." For a moment, she said nothing. Then a faint smile curved her lips. "Neither am I." The simple truth of it hit him harder than any bullet. She wasn't fragile anymore, not in the way he'd thought. The woman who stood before him was stronger than the storms outside, and he found himself drawn to that strength like a man stumbling toward warmth after years in the cold. They spent the morning working side by side, repairing what the storm had damaged. The roof still dripped, the fences leaned, but their movements were easy now, unspoken rhythm carrying them through the chores. Emma laughed once, softly, when he dropped a hammer and cursed under his breath. It was a sound he'd never heard from her before, light and unguarded. He didn't realize until then how much he'd missed the sound of laughter. Around noon, they shared lunch on the porch. The clouds were breaking, shafts of sunlight cutting through the gray sky. Emma's eyes followed the distant hills where the pines swayed in the wind. "You think he's still out there?" she asked quietly. "Boone Carter?" Cole nodded. "Men like him don't stop hunting. He's out there somewhere, waiting for me to slip. Then we won't let him catch you off guard." The "we" caught him off guard instead. She said it without hesitation, without fear, like a promise. He studied her face, searching for some trace of doubt, but there was none. Her courage humbled him. "You don't owe me nothing, Emma," he said softly. "I know," she replied, "but I'm not walking away either." Her words sank deep, and for the first time in years, Cole Archer didn't feel alone. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in gold, he joined her by the fire. She was mending one of his shirts again, though the stitching wasn't really needed. It was her way of keeping her hands busy when her thoughts grew heavy. "Emma," he said, his tone quieter than the crackle of the flames, "you deserve better than a man with blood on his past." She didn't look up. "I deserve a man who tells me the truth, that's all." He swallowed hard. "The truth is, I don't know how to be anything else but this. I've done things I can't take back." She set the shirt down, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. "You think I don't know what regret feels like? You're not the only one who's made choices that haunt you. But you can't spend the rest of your life looking backward, Cole. Not if you want to live." Her words hit him like a shot, steady, precise, and aimed straight at the heart. For years he'd believed he was too far gone for redemption. Yet here was Emma Dalton, the woman the world called meek, speaking with the kind of strength that could bend even the hardest man. He leaned forward, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away this time. Her fingers tightened around his, small but certain. "Emma," he murmured, "you don't know what you're risking being close to me." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then let me decide what I'm willing to risk." The fire between them wasn't just warmth anymore. It was a tether, fragile but unbreakable. Cole wanted to pull her close again, to forget everything beyond the cabin walls, but he held back. She'd already given him more courage than he deserved. Instead, they sat there, side by side, letting the quiet settle. Outside, the wind had stilled. For the first time since he'd come to Willow Creek, Cole allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't painted in blood. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to build something real here, with her. But peace has a short life on the frontier. As the night deepened, the unease returned. Cole's instincts sharpened, that old sixth sense from his outlaw days whispering that something wasn't right. He stood checking his revolver, scanning the dark through the window. Emma noticed his tension. "What is it?" "Not sure," he said, moving toward the door. "Stay inside." The moonlight caught the edges of the barn in the distance. The horses shifted nervously, their silhouettes jerking in the dim light. Cole's stomach knotted. He moved quietly, boots barely making a sound against the dirt. The air was too still, no wind, no insects, no night sounds at all. Then it came. A single crack of a gunshot split the silence, followed by another closer. The echo tore through the night like thunder. The barn door shuddered as something, or someone, hit it from the outside. Emma's scream cut through the dark. "Cole!" He ran for her, gun already drawn, heart pounding. Another shot rang out, this one slicing past the porch post and splintering the wood. Cole ducked low, pulling Emma to the ground. In the distance, a shadow moved, one man, maybe two, vanishing back into the trees. The horses screamed, the barn door swinging open. Cole fired a warning shot, but the attackers were already gone. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Emma's trembling breath beside him. Cole rose slowly, scanning the edge of the property. His blood ran cold when he saw it, a bullet hole through the barn door, and beside it, carved into the wood, a crude red handprint. Boone Carter's mark. Cole turned toward the cabin, his voice hard and low. "They've found us." At dawn, gunshots echo near the barn. Someone's come for Cole. The past rode back into Willow Creek with vengeance in its saddle, and by sunrise, the dirt outside Cole Archer's cabin would remember the taste of blood. The first light of dawn spilled weakly over the hills, brushing the frost off the fence line. Cole stood there, rifle in hand, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. The red handprint carved into the barn door still bled through his thoughts like a wound that wouldn't close. Boone Carter's men had found them, and that meant the rest would soon follow. Every instinct from his outlaw years screamed that this was only the beginning. Inside, Emma moved quietly, loading the pistol he'd given her. She'd never fired a gun before the night prior, but the fear that once froze her hands now steadied them. She wasn't the timid woman the town whispered about anymore. She was a fighter, born not of anger but of necessity. Cole's voice was low when he spoke. "If they come again, stay inside. Shoot only if you have to." Emma shook her head. "You'll need another set of eyes. I won't hide while you fight." There was no hesitation in her tone, no trace of the girl who used to flinch at raised voices. He looked at her for a long moment, the rifle heavy in his grip. He wanted to argue, to protect her from the world's cruelty. But something in her eyes told him it was too late for that. She'd already chosen her place in this fight, beside him. The morning dragged with eerie quiet. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Cole scanned the ridge to the west where the tree line broke against the open plain. That's where they'd come from last night. 2 riders, quick and silent. He'd killed one, he was sure of it. But the other had escaped into the dark, and outlaws rarely rode alone. By mid-morning, the sun burned through the fog, and for a fleeting hour it almost felt like peace. Emma sat on the porch, sewing a tear in her sleeve while Cole fixed the fence line. His way of pretending things were still under control. But as the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of dust and horse sweat, peace vanished like smoke. He heard it before he saw it, the low rumble of hooves. Then came the glint of metal on the horizon. 2 riders. No, 3, maybe more behind them. "Emma!" he barked, grabbing his rifle. "Get inside!" She dropped the sewing, running for the door as Cole took cover behind the wagon. The riders crested the ridge, guns drawn, faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. Their leader rode in front, his long coat flapping in the wind. The mark of the red hand burned into his saddle. "Archer!" the man shouted. "Boone sends his regards." Cole didn't waste time with words. His first shot cracked through the air, catching one rider square in the chest. The man tumbled off his horse, hitting the dirt hard. The others fanned out, returning fire. Bullets tore through the fence posts, splintering wood inches from where Cole crouched. Inside the cabin, Emma ducked low, heart hammering. She could hear every shot, every curse shouted over the wind. She spotted one outlaw circling wide toward the back of the barn. Without thinking, she grabbed the pistol and moved toward the back window. The outlaw kicked the barn door open, thinking he'd flank Cole from behind, but he never saw her there. Emma steadied her trembling hands, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening inside the cabin. The man spun, dropped to his knees, and fell still. Her breath came fast, but she didn't drop the weapon. Through the open door, she could see Cole moving fast, reloading and firing in rhythm, every motion practiced, deadly. He was outnumbered but not outmatched. Still, one bullet grazed his shoulder, sending him sprawling against the wagon. "Cole!" Emma cried, bursting from the cabin before he could stop her. She reached him as another shot whizzed overhead. He gritted his teeth, blood seeping through his sleeve. "Get back inside!" he barked. "Not without you!" She raised her pistol again, firing toward the ridge. The bullet missed, but it was enough to send the remaining rider reeling back. Cole steadied his rifle, taking aim. His shot rang out, striking the man's hat clean off. The outlaw yanked his horse around and retreated, disappearing into the tree line. The echo of hooves faded, leaving behind the ragged sound of wind and their own breathing. For a long moment, neither spoke. Smoke hung over the yard like a ghost refusing to leave. Two bodies lay still near the fence, one from the night before, one from today. The fence posts leaned broken and splintered, the ground dark with blood. Emma turned to Cole, her face pale but steady. "You're bleeding." He looked down at his arm. The wound wasn't deep, but it burned like fire. "Just a scratch," he muttered, though his voice was tight with pain. "Come inside," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Inside the cabin, she worked quickly, cutting away the torn fabric and cleaning the wound with careful hands. Cole winced but didn't pull away. He watched her face as she worked, the concentration in her eyes, the way her lower lip trembled only when she thought he wasn't looking. "You saved my life out there," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We saved each other." He reached up, catching her wrist lightly. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" Her gaze met his. "I learned something from you, Cole. Fear only wins if you let it." He wanted to say more, but the words caught in his throat. There was something about her calm that undid him, something stronger than bravery. It was love, though neither dared to name it. When she finished wrapping his arm, he caught her hand again. "Emma," he began. But before he could speak, the distant echo of a horse's cry cut through the quiet. They both froze. Cole rose to his feet, grabbing his rifle with his good arm. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the tree line. One of the outlaws, barely upright, was crawling toward his horse near the fence. The man's face was streaked with dirt and blood, his breath ragged. Cole raised his rifle, but the outlaw lifted his head, his grin twisted and bloody. "You can kill me, Archer," he croaked. "But Boone's comin'. He's bringin' hell with him." Then he swung himself into the saddle and spurred his horse, disappearing down the ridge before Cole could fire. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. Emma stepped beside him, her eyes on the horizon. "He'll bring more," she whispered. Cole nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready." But deep down he knew the fight ahead wouldn't just test his aim, it would test everything they'd built, everything fragile between them. He looked at the broken fence, the dark stains in the dirt, and the clouds gathering again on the horizon. The past wasn't done with him, not yet. The surviving outlaw, bleeding but grinning, rides off into the hills with one last promise. Boone Carter is coming, and he's bringing more men. Sometimes love means leaving before the bullets do, but for Cole Archer, walking away from Emma Dalton would hurt worse than any wound a gun could carve. The world was quiet again after the gunfight, but it was the kind of quiet that followed bloodshed. The stillness before something worse. The bodies had been buried on the far edge of the field, and the fence line stood repaired, though Cole knew the wood wouldn't hold against what was coming next. Every sound, every shadow now felt like a warning. Boone Carter's men were out there, somewhere beyond the hills, gathering strength. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. Emma sat by the window, her sewing untouched, her mind far from the small domestic calm she'd built. She watched the horizon through the gray veil of dusk, the ridgeline stretching like a scar across the land. Her fingers were steady, but her heart beat hard against her ribs. She knew something was shifting in Cole, something she couldn't quite name, but she could feel it every time he looked at her. He'd been pacing since morning, checking his guns, repacking his saddlebag, his every movement tight and restless. The weight in his silence told her what his words had not yet confessed. He was planning to leave. When he finally stopped, the sun was setting behind him, staining the sky in orange and red. "Emma," he said softly, "we need to talk." Her stomach tightened. "Then talk." He hesitated, then met her eyes. "You can't stay here." She rose slowly, her voice calm but sharp. "Can't stay, this is my home." "It's mine too," he said, "but it ain't safe no more. Boone Carter's coming for me, not for you. I can draw him away, lead him into the hills, finish this before it ever touches the town." "You mean leave," she said flatly. "You mean run." "I mean protect you." Her laughter came brittle, almost angry. "You think disappearing is protection? You think I'll sit here and pray you come back like every other woman who's lost her heart to a man with a gun?" He took a step closer, his voice rough. "If I stay, you'll get caught in the crossfire. You saw what they did to the barn, to the fence. You think Boone Carter cares who he kills?" "I don't care," she said fiercely. "You told me once I was stronger than I looked. Then let me prove it. Don't shut me out now." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, the tension in his shoulders visible even in the dim light. "You don't understand, Emma. I've been running from this man for half my life. He killed Annie. He killed half the gang. He'll keep killing until I'm in the ground. I can't lose you too." Her breath hitched at the name. Annie, the ghost that still lingered in the corners of his soul. But this time it didn't sting. She understood it now, understood that his guilt was what kept him chained to the past. She crossed the room, standing in front of him. "Then stop running," she said quietly. "You already lost one woman to him. Don't lose another because you're too afraid to fight with her beside you." He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time saw the fire she carried. Not anger, but love forged in fear and defiance. "You deserve more than this life, Emma." She shook her head. "I deserve a choice, and I'm choosing you." The words landed with the force of truth. For a moment neither moved. The only sound was the slow, steady crackle of the fire. Cole's breath came unsteady, his voice low when he finally spoke. "I don't know how to love someone without losing them," he admitted. "Then learn," she whispered. He reached for her, his hand trembling slightly as it touched her cheek. Her eyes closed against the warmth, and all the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. "I ain't good with words," he said. "Never have been. But what I feel when I look at you—" He broke off, swallowing hard. "It's something I thought was gone. You make me want to stay. You make me want to live." Her hand came up to cover his, her voice barely a whisper. "Then stay." It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. He pulled her into his arms, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. There was no Boone Carter, no Red Hand Gang, no ghosts of the past. Only two people standing in the quiet of their small home, clinging to something that felt like redemption. When he kissed her, it wasn't wild or desperate like before. It was slow, steady, filled with everything they hadn't dared say. The kiss spoke of forgiveness, of fear, of hope they both thought they'd buried. When they finally parted, her forehead rested against his. "You're not alone anymore, Cole," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Reckon I don't deserve you." "Maybe not," she said, "but you've got me anyway." Outside, the wind shifted. The night carried a strange stillness, the kind that made even the crickets fall silent. Cole's instincts stirred again. The old sense that danger was close, breathing just beyond the horizon. He glanced toward the window, unease settling deep in his gut. Emma noticed. "What is it?" He walked to the door, peering out into the darkness. The moon had risen full and pale, casting silver light across the fields. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Then he saw it, the faint rhythmic flicker of light along the distant ridge. Torches, moving in a line. His stomach turned cold. "They're here," he said quietly. Emma stepped to his side, her face hardening as she followed his gaze. In the distance, shapes moved, riders, maybe 10 or 12, descending slowly toward Willow Creek. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Not long enough," Cole said, reaching for his rifle. She moved toward the cabinet, pulling out the pistol he'd given her. Her hands didn't tremble this time. "Then we make it count." He looked at her, pride and fear warring in his chest. She was no longer the shy woman who'd once flinched at whispers. She was steel now, his equal, his match. The torches moved closer, their glow cutting through the dark like fiery eyes. Boone Carter's men were coming, and the whispers of goodbye had turned into the drums of war. Cole took one last look at Emma, his voice steady but low. "Whatever happens tonight, know this, I love you." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then don't say goodbye yet." Outside, the thunder of hooves grew louder, echoing through the valley. The horizon burned with firelight. The past had finally caught up to Cole Archer, and this time it was coming with guns drawn. Before dawn, the enemy's riders are seen on the horizon, torches blazing. Boone Carter's vengeance riding toward Willow Creek. Every western town has one battle that writes its legend, and before dawn, Willow Creek's would be written in gunfire and blood. The night had teeth. The sound of hooves thundered down from the ridge, shaking the ground beneath the frozen earth. Torches flickered like serpents' tongues, snaking toward the heart of Willow Creek. From the porch of his cabin, Cole Archer watched the glow move closer, each torch marking another man come to collect a debt that had been years in the making. Boone Carter's men were finally here. Inside, Emma loaded the last of the ammunition into her pistol, her fingers sure and steady. There was no fear in her movements now, only purpose. The woman who once lived in whispers had turned into something else. Calm, deliberate, unyielding. When she stepped out onto the porch beside Cole, the light caught her face just right. And for a moment, he thought she looked like a flame herself. Quiet but burning. "They'll hit the town first," Cole said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Boone wants to make a show of it." "Then we'll end it there," she replied. He turned to her, his voice low. "You don't have to come." "I know," she said, sliding a cartridge into the rifle he handed her. "But I'm coming anyway." Cole couldn't argue. He'd stopped trying to protect her from herself long ago. What they faced now wasn't just his past. It was their present, and maybe their last stand. By the time they reached the edge of town, the first shots had already cracked through the air. Windows shattered, horses screamed, and the smell of gunpowder rolled through the cold like smoke from a dying star. Cole took cover behind the sheriff's office, pulling his rifle tight against his shoulder. Emma crouched beside him, reloading with precision that came from sheer willpower, not practice. Across the street, Boone's men tore through the saloon, flames licking the windows as they looted what they could. Boone Carter himself rode at the center of it all, tall and broad, his long coat billowing like a shadow. His face, once familiar, was now twisted by scars and hate. He dismounted slowly, his spurs jangling as he called out across the chaos. "Cole Archer," he roared. "You got something of mine, and I've come to take it back." Cole rose from cover, his voice steady. "Only thing you ever owned was misery, Boone, and I ain't handing that over easy." Gunfire erupted before the last word left his mouth. Bullets screamed through the street, striking posts, walls, and windows. Emma fired back, her aim sharp, taking down one of Boone's riders clean. The townsfolk, roused from sleep and fear, began to appear. Men clutching hunting rifles, women pulling children behind cover. Sheriff Starr or not, Cole had always been one of them, and tonight they saw it clearer than ever. Old Marshal Hayes, his limp heavy but his aim steady, took up position beside the general store. "You're not fighting alone, Cole," he shouted. "We've got your back." The tide began to turn. For every outlaw who advanced, 2 townsmen fired back. The sound was deafening, gunfire echoing through the narrow streets, glass exploding and wood splintering under impact. But Boone Carter moved through the storm untouched, his revolver spinning like a part of him. Cole saw him step into the open, his eyes locked on the sheriff's office. Boone grinned, cruel and familiar. "You always were too good for your own kind, Archer. That badge don't wash off blood." Cole's rifle fired, grazing Boone's hat, knocking it clean off. Boone didn't flinch. He raised his gun and fired back, the bullet slamming into the wall inches from Emma's head. She ducked, gasping, and Cole's heart seized. "Stay down," he barked. "I'm not leaving you," she shouted back, firing again. The gunfight stretched on, minute after brutal minute. The street was a storm of smoke and shouting, men falling, horses fleeing, and the red-orange light of burning buildings painting everything in fire. Cole and Emma moved as one, he shooting, she reloading, both refusing to yield an inch. Then came the moment everything stopped. Boone stepped out from the smoke, his revolver aimed straight at Emma. "There's the pretty wife," he sneered. "It didn't figure you for the domestic type, Archer. Guess we all get soft eventually." Emma froze, the pistol half raised, her breath trembling. Cole saw it all happen in slow motion. The smirk, the gleam of metal, the split second before Boone pulled the trigger. "Emma!" he shouted, diving forward. The gunshot cracked the air. Pain tore through his side like fire. He hit the ground hard, the world blurring into a haze of dust and light. He heard Emma scream his name, heard Boone laugh, and then another gunshot, sharper, closer. When Cole blinked his eyes open, Boone was on the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood soaking through his coat. Emma stood above him, both hands wrapped around the smoking pistol. "You don't get to take him," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Boone's grin twisted into something dark. "This ain't over," he spat. "You kill me and 100 more'll come. The red hand don't die easy." Cole struggled to sit up, his hand pressed to the wound just below his ribs. "Then I'll keep burying them till there ain't none left." Boone's men, realizing their leader was down, began to retreat. The townsfolk advanced, guns raised, shouting for them to leave. One by one, the riders fled into the hills, leaving behind their dead and wounded. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the hiss of burning buildings and the ragged breathing of those who'd survived. Emma dropped to her knees beside Cole, her hands shaking as she pressed against his wound. "Stay with me," she whispered. "You're not leaving me now." He managed a faint smile, blood on his lips. "Told you I wasn't running, didn't I?" Tears filled her eyes as she tried to keep pressure on the wound. Around them, townsfolk gathered, their faces pale and soot-streaked. Marshal Hayes knelt nearby. "He's gonna need the doc, quick, get him inside." They carried him into the sheriff's office, the very place he'd once sworn to protect, and laid him on the desk. The firelight flickered across the badge on his chest, still gleaming despite the blood. Outside, the wind carried the smell of smoke and victory, but it tasted bitter. Emma held his hand, whispering, "You did it, Cole. You saved them." He tried to speak, but the pain dragged him under. His vision dimmed, fading to black. Outside, the town of Willow Creek stood battered but unbroken. The people had fought, and they had won. But as the night deepened and the doctor rushed through the door, one truth settled heavy in every heart. The battle was over, but the cost was yet to be counted. As the last of Boone Carter's men flee, Cole collapses from a gunshot wound taken while saving Emma, his fate hanging in the balance as dawn breaks over a burning Willow Creek. In the silence after gunfire, love still whispered, and in that fragile quiet, Emma Dalton finally became the kind of woman the world could no longer ignore. Morning crept over Willow Creek like a wounded thing, pale and trembling. Smoke from the fires still hung in the air, mingling with the scent of gunpowder and pine. The town looked like a half-remembered dream. Broken windows, charred timbers, and the red-brown stains that marked where men had stood and fallen. Yet beneath the ruin there was something else too. Life. The kind of stubborn life that clung to the earth no matter how hard it was trampled. In the sheriff's office, Emma sat by Cole's bedside, her hand clasped around his. He was alive, though barely. The bullet had missed his heart by an inch, tearing through muscle and bone. The doctor had said it was a miracle he'd made it through the night. Emma didn't believe in miracles before, but now she did, because she was looking at one. Cole's skin was pale, his breath shallow but steady. Every rise and fall of his chest felt like a promise she didn't dare count on. She hadn't slept, not since he'd fallen in the street with blood pouring from his side. Every sound outside, the creak of the floorboards, the murmur of voices, made her heart jolt, as if the world might try to take him away again. When his eyelids finally fluttered open, the relief hit her so hard she nearly broke. "Emma," he rasped, voice dry as dust. She leaned closer, tears threatening but refusing to fall. "You're safe," she whispered. "It's over." He tried to smile, but the effort twisted into a grimace. "You sure?" She nodded, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Boone's men are gone. The town ran them out before sunrise." He closed his eyes again, a faint sigh escaping. "Didn't think I'd live to see quiet again." She squeezed his hand, whispering, "Then don't waste it." For the next few days, the world slowed. The town rebuilt in hushed determination. Men who had once crossed the street to avoid Emma now tipped their hats in respect. Women brought baskets of bread to her door, no longer whispering behind her back, but calling her name with kindness. The story of what she'd done, how she'd fought beside Cole, how she'd stood over Boone Carter himself, spread faster than wildfire. "The quiet Mrs. Archer," they used to say with smirks. Now it was said with awe. Emma didn't bask in it. She simply did what needed doing. She helped bury the fallen, stitched wounds for the injured, and rebuilt what could be saved. Every time she walked through the square, she felt eyes follow her, not out of gossip, but gratitude. And every night she returned to Cole's side. The days passed slow and tender. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. He would lie back on the cot, his voice low but sure, telling her stories about the places he'd been. The dust roads of Abilene, the canyons near Santa Fe, the old trails he'd taken when he was still trying to outrun his sins. Emma listened, not judging, not interrupting. She knew his words weren't confessions, they were memories clawing their way into the light, and she let them breathe. One evening, as the sun bled gold through the window, he said quietly, "I used to think redemption was something a man found at the end of a gun, that maybe if I shot enough devils I'd balance the scales." She looked up from the bowl of stew she'd been stirring for him. "And now?" His eyes softened, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Now I know it's sitting right here, telling me to eat my supper before it gets cold." Her heart caught. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, like a man who'd stopped fighting the world long enough to realize he didn't have to fight himself anymore. That night, as he drifted to sleep, Emma sat by the window, the lamp casting soft light across the room. Outside, the stars stretched wide and endless. For the first time since she'd come to Willow Creek, she didn't feel like a stranger. By the week's end, Cole was strong enough to walk again, though he did so with a limp and Emma's hand steadying him. The town held a small gathering that evening, a quiet thank you to the man who'd saved them and the woman who'd stood beside him. Marshal Hayes clapped Cole on the shoulder. "Never thought I'd see the day the folks of Willow Creek would raise a glass to an archer. Guess times do change." Cole smiled faintly. "Guess they do." Emma stood nearby, her hair loose for once, the firelight catching its auburn glow. The townsfolk greeted her with genuine warmth. A few women even whispered that she should teach the young girls how to shoot. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Lord knows I'm no teacher," she said. "I just got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," said Mrs. Harlan, the shopkeeper's wife. "You've got grit, dear. Always did." That night, when the gathering ended, Cole and Emma walked home together through the quiet streets. The wind carried the scent of smoke and wet earth, the kind that always follows after fire. Cole's arm brushed hers as they walked, and neither moved away. When they reached the cabin, the porch creaked under their boots just as it always had. Cole paused, staring at the barn, the same one he'd nearly died defending. "Funny," he murmured. "Place looks smaller than I remember." Emma smiled softly. "Maybe it's just you that's bigger now." He glanced at her, his expression tender. "You saved me, Emma. Not just that night. Every night since I met you." Her throat tightened. "You saved me first." They stood in the doorway for a long moment, the night wind curling around them like a quiet blessing. Inside, the fire still glowed faintly, a small promise against the dark. Cole stepped in first, setting his hat on the table. Emma followed, ready to prepare tea before they settled in. But as she turned toward the shelf by the window, something caught her eye. A small envelope, sealed and yellowed with time, lying atop Cole's folded coat. Her brow furrowed. "Cole, what's this?" He turned, his face tightening when he saw it. Emma picked it up carefully. The paper was brittle, the handwriting elegant but faded. Across the front, in looping script, were the words, "For Cole Archer." Her heart skipped. "It's addressed to you," she said quietly. He stepped closer, his hand hovering over hers but not yet taking the letter. "Where'd you find it?" "It was here," she said softly. "Just now. Maybe someone left it earlier." Cole's eyes darkened, a flicker of recognition or fear crossing his face. Emma looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who's it from?" He swallowed hard, the name catching in his throat. "Annie," he said at last. The fire popped in the silence, sending a single spark into the air before fading. As Cole and Emma plan to rebuild their lives, Emma finds a sealed letter on the table, addressed to Cole, and signed by the woman he once lost. Some men are haunted by the past until love teaches them to stay. And for Cole Archer, it took the fire, the blood, and one quiet woman to finally set him free. The sealed letter lay on the table like a ghost that refused to die. The flames in the hearth flickered low, their light catching on the thin parchment as if daring Cole to open it. He sat there for a long time, staring at his name written in Annie's familiar hand. Graceful, soft, and painfully alive despite all the years that had passed since she'd been buried under Texas dust. Emma stood across from him, her heart caught between curiosity and restraint. She could see the war in his eyes, the guilt, the love, the loyalty stretched between past and present. He had fought men with guns, but this battle was something far deeper. "Cole," she said quietly, "you should read it." He didn't answer at first. His thumb brushed the seal, tracing the dried wax like it might bleed if he pressed too hard. "I don't know if I can," he murmured. "Feels like opening it means letting her go all over again." Emma's voice was steady. "Maybe that's what you need to do." He finally broke the seal, the paper sighing as it opened, like a breath held too long. His eyes moved slowly over the words. The handwriting wavered near the end, the ink faded with time, but the message cut through every layer of his heart. "Cole, if this letter finds you, then the world's been kinder than we thought. I know you blame yourself for what happened, but I want you to stop. The life you're living, the man you've become, that's enough of an apology for both of us. I never wanted vengeance, Cole. I only ever wanted you to forgive yourself. If there's still love in you, give it to someone who can walk beside you. You always looked back even when I begged you to ride forward, so promise me you won't keep riding alone. Annie." The words blurred. Cole blinked hard, trying to steady his breath. His hand shook as he folded the letter again. For years, her death had been the weight that kept him tied to guilt, a reminder of every wrong turn he'd taken. Now, somehow, her forgiveness felt heavier and lighter, all at once. Emma stood still, watching him. He looked different in that moment, softer, older, like the fight had finally drained out of him. She walked to him, resting a hand on his shoulder. What did she say? He looked up, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "She forgave me." Emma's breath caught. "Then you can forgive yourself too." He nodded, though his voice was quiet. "Maybe I can now." He turned the letter over in his hands once more before glancing toward the fire. The flames danced low, casting warm light across the cabin. Slowly, deliberately, Cole held the letter over the flame. The edges curled, blackened, and turned to ash. Emma stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "You sure?" He met her eyes, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah. It's time I stopped living with ghosts." They stood together, watching as the paper disintegrated into embers, rising for a brief moment before vanishing into smoke. For Cole, it felt like the final chapter closing, not in pain, but in peace. Outside, the sun began to set, bleeding gold through the window. The light stretched across the cabin floor, touching every scar, every wound, every piece of their shared story. Cole turned to Emma, reaching for her hand. "I spent so long thinking the past was what made me who I am," he said. "But it's you, Emma. It's you that changed me." She smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "I didn't change you, Cole. I just gave you a place to stop running." He laughed quietly, the sound rough but real. "Reckon that's the same thing." They stepped outside together, the cool evening air brushing against their faces. The town of Willow Creek was quiet now. The chaos of the last week replaced by the sounds of life rebuilding. Hammers striking, horses calling, children's laughter echoing faintly through the streets. The people had survived, and so had they. Cole looked out over the hills where Boone Carter had once ridden in with hate burning in his eyes. "He's gone," Cole murmured. "All of 'em. Feels strange not having someone riding after me." Emma squeezed his hand. "You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." He turned to her, his gaze full of something deep and wordless. "You know, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life paying for the things I'd done. But somehow you made me believe a man can start again." Her voice was soft, but her words held strength. "You didn't need me to make you believe it, Cole. You just needed someone to remind you you're worth saving." He smiled faintly, pulling her closer. "Guess I found the right reminder." They stood together as the sun dipped lower, the last rays painting the land in fire and gold. The wind rustled the grass, carrying the faint scent of sage and smoke. The same smell that had once meant danger, now only meaning home. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Cole Archer felt still. Not the stillness of fear or guilt, but the kind that came after the storm when a man finally realized he'd survived everything trying to break him. He turned toward Emma, tracing a hand along her cheek. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent years thinking I didn't deserve peace, but you made me believe I could have it." Her lips curved into a small smile. "You earned it, Cole. Every bit of it." They stepped back inside as the last light of day faded from the sky. The cabin glowed with the soft warmth of the hearth, shadows dancing across the wooden walls that had witnessed every tear, every fight, every truth between them. Cole sat down by the fire, Emma beside him. Neither spoke for a while, they didn't need to. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was sacred. He took her hand, the same hand that had once trembled when he first touched it. Now it was steady, strong, intertwined with his like it had always belonged there. "Emma," he said softly. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "What is it?" He smiled, slow and sure. "You saved me. Not just from Boone, not just from my past, from myself." She brushed her thumb against his knuckles. "No, Cole. You saved yourself. I just refused to let you forget who you were." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air. Outside, the last of the daylight slipped away, leaving behind a velvet night scattered with stars. Cole leaned in, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I was always looking for a way to stop running. Guess I finally found one." Emma's eyes softened. "And what's that?" "You," he said simply. She smiled then, real, radiant, free. The kind of smile that carried everything she'd ever hidden and everything she'd finally become. As the wind stirred the curtains and the room glowed in amber light, Emma leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear. "I was never the shy one, Cole," she whispered, her voice like silk and thunder all at once. "I was just waiting for the right man to see me." He smiled, eyes closing as he pulled her into his arms. The fire burned low, the world outside quiet and still. And for the first time, Cole Archer stopped running, not from the law, not from ghosts, but toward the life he'd finally chosen. Emma's whisper seals their journey, two wounded souls finding peace at last. Their love earned through the fires of redemption. And that, folks, was the story of love born from dust and fire. If Cole and Emma's journey stirred something in your heart, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in their place? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold tales from the Wild West. Stories of heartbreak, redemption, and courage that time tried to bury. Your support keeps these campfire stories alive. So saddle up, we ride again next week.